What do I think the long-term case for Bitcoin is, or even more than the case for Bitcoin? What is the long-term prediction, let's say, to the best of my ability? I've given it a lot of thought, and I have said this many times before on here, but people keep asking me. So hopefully, this is going to be valuable to you. I guess the message needs to keep being said. Um, Oftentimes, my hyperbulishness on Bitcoin, my optimism on Bitcoin, is interpreted as saying that the US dollar is going to completely disappear in a few years, or that it's going to completely die, get completely gutted, or whatever. And while I think that's true in the very long term, I want to be perfectly clear that I think the next few decades, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, maybe longer, maybe much less, whatever the case, I don't know when, but I think that the US dollar has a long time to survive. And here's the reason why. Um, Basically, the world we are in right now has all these political jurisdictions, all these political organizations. You have the US government with the US dollar, you have the European Union with the euro, you have the yen, you have the yuan, you have a bunch of different pesos and lira and different currencies across the world. And you can think of the modern world, what I would call the ancient world tomorrow, as this kind of barter system between political currencies. I have my US political energy in dollars in my back pocket, and if I go travel, like when I travel to El Salvador here, or like when I go to Canada, I'm exchanging my political energy for the political energy of that local population. So, if I go to Canada, let's say, Canada's political currency, Canada's political energy is weaker than American political energy. And so I go there, I disproportionately benefit by being able to purchase goods and services and labor and whatever there at a slightly better rate for me than Canadians can get coming here to the United States. My political energy is superior to theirs, and so I benefit. And at their expense, that's what should be said too, at their direct expense. In a free market, everyone benefits from innovation and collaboration and cooperation, but when you have this barter system between different political currencies, me winning with my American political energy is inherently at the expense of these other political energies and these other nations, particularly the developing world. And so the beauty with Bitcoin is that it doesn't rely on this kind of barter. It doesn't rely on force or coercion to enforce the manipulation and enforce the centralization and enforce the debasement of this political energy. That's the beauty of Bitcoin. And so then Bitcoiners then go one step and say, oh, well, the dollar's going to collapse and the whole world's going to become hyper-Bitcoinized in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And that's possible, but I want to make clear the death of the dollar does not necessarily connotate to the adoption of Bitcoin. Even if the dollar completely hyperinflated this decade and the 2020s here, what it's far less probable that people would adopt Bitcoin, and far more probable that they would create new political energy, create a new political currency backing in cooperation with that political energy, and use that. Perhaps that's a CBDC, perhaps that's a new form of government or whatever. So I think that's needs to be made really clear, and I think we could see that both from first principles perspective, that people don't adopt Bitcoin because of the weakness of political currency. Bitcoin does not survive as a function of the weakness of an inferior system. Bitcoin survives as the strength of the users and the people within that system. Now, granted, the death of the inferior system encourages people to adopt the new and better system, but it's simply a natural effect of a pain point that causes people to adopt it. The value to Bitcoin comes from people adopting it in the first place. So I think we can see that clearly in examples like Lebanon or Turkey or Argentina or Sri Lanka or many other places across the world where inflation and those political currencies are significantly worse here than in the United States. Even I mentioned Canada earlier. You can even argue Canada. In Canada you had the incredible government overreach during the 2020 to 2023 virus era, atop with the trucker protests and everything else. Whether you agree or disagree with the worldview, reality is that the political energy of Canada is vastly inferior to the political energy here in the United States. And then the developing world and these other nations with even higher inflation, it's even significantly worse in Canada. And yet, even in those places, we're not seeing hyper-Bitcoinization. Are they adopting Bitcoin faster than we are? Yes, definitely. 7 of the 10 fastest adopting nations in the world, developing nations. So are they adopting Bitcoin faster? Clearly, obviously, yes. But again, they're nowhere near hyper-Bitcoinization. They're nowhere near 10% or 30% or 50 or 90% of people in the country using Bitcoin on a fully Bitcoin standard. So we're not seeing that. And so I think that's evidence to support that first principles that we're not going to see this hyper-Bitcoinization as a function of some hyperinflationary event in the United States. So what is far more probable, in my personal opinion? I think as the 100 other forms of political energy continue to decline over time, they continue to trend down towards zero against the US dollar, I think that desire for political energy will then transfer into the euro and into mostly the US dollar. Like, as horrible as it is to say, I'm actually really bullish, I'm really optimistic on the US dollar priced in terms of other political currencies. I think that needs to be said really clear. I'm not optimistic or bullish on the dollar in terms of hard assets like real estate. I am not bullish on the dollar in terms of Bitcoin especially. I'm not bullish on the dollar in terms of land. I'm not bullish in terms of any hard asset that's more difficult to create than dollars. Why? Because we want to prop those prices up, again, to strengthen political might. People are more willing to give you political energy. They're more willing to give you political might and vote you into office if their house prices are going up, if their stocks and their land and their gold prices are going up. People will give you more political energy if you can manipulate prices to go up higher for longer over a significant period of time. And the only reason you have any desire to lower asset prices for a given period of time is if they begin to question the foundation of your political currency. Like right now, the Fed, the U.S. government is tightening credit. They're tightening the balance sheet. They're tightening the monetary supply faster than they ever have in recent history, and that's because people were losing faith in the dollar. And so they were losing that political energy, and so they have to constrain it. They have to make it a little less bad as of a form of money to create that demand for dollars again, give them a little bit more political energy. But when house prices begin coming down, when these prices of corporate valuations and commodities, when these prices begin to fall, and we have this pain of deflation, and we have this beginning of a credit unwind, the people will revolt. They will become upset. They will rebel, and they will protest against the government, and they will demand printing. They will demand stimulus, because that's just human nature. We will demand the debasement of the dollars, and we will say, I will give you, politicians, more political energy if you force our house prices to go back up and everything of that sort. And so, because, but again, to make it clear, that's why I'm not optimistic on the dollar in terms of these hard assets. Because human nature and political might and the incentive structures and game theory, whatever you want to call it, even from a Christian perspective, you could call it the fallenness of man or whatever. We will always desire the dollar to fall faster and faster and faster. We will always desire the dollar to decline in relative purchasing power to all of these other assets that I've listed. But it will be the same, except exponentially worse in all these other countries. And so as the demand for these political energies and these other 100 nations across the world continues to fall at an exponential rate, unfortunately, all that demand is going to flow into U.S. dollars. I've got my little American flag in the background there, so I guess it's a little appropriate. But I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to see Bitcoin adoption increase. We're going to see Bitcoin adoption increase exponentially. If we're at 0.1% or 0.5% global adoption right now, over the next 10 years, maybe that goes up 5x, 10x, 50x. But even if Bitcoin adoption in the next 7 years goes up 50x, we're still talking about only single-digit global adoption. We're talking nowhere near hyper-Bitcoinization. So do I think the U.S. dollar is going anywhere anytime soon? No, I don't. Do I think the dollar is going to continue to fall? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think the dollar could easily fall another 30 to, maybe even 75, 80% in the next few years alone. Who knows? Depends what basket of goods you're measuring from. It depends what your definition of, stability is. For me, it's Bitcoin. And so if Bitcoin goes up threefold, then the dollar has fallen by a significant portion. But anyway, I think all that political energy is just going to go into the dollar. And I think this first phase over the coming years, a decade or two here, is we're going to see more and more of these hyperinflationary events, more and more of these defaults, more and more of these collapses of these inferior political energies. And Americans will adopt Bitcoin at a faster degree, but they'll still be relatively ignorant on what's really happening. They'll think, oh, America's different, when in reality it's not. There's a garbage truck coming. Sorry about that. They might be picking up all my Venezuelan bolivars. I got like a whole stack of, I was holding a stack of Venezuelan bolivars a few months ago, and it was just unbelievable. He was explaining to me that I think it was like 3 million bolivars or something was a cent. And, in my hand, I had like 30,000 bolivars or something. So I was like, wow, like, 1,000 of these or 100 of these or whatever it is a few cents. It's just that's the unfortunate reality. Americans, we think we're different because we look at Venezuela, we look at these other countries, and we think, oh, we're different. And it's like, no, we're not. We're just the last domino to fall. We're just the last political currency people will leave. They will not adopt Bitcoin. They will not willfully, voluntarily subjugate themselves to the rules of Bitcoin until they've crossed a pain threshold high enough that they are forced to do so. So anyway, I think this idea of Bitcoin mass adoption within 10 years, I think frankly that's probably a pipe dream. Even if we have hyperinflation, I don't think most people would understand Bitcoin. I don't think most people will learn about it. I think instead they would go to the streets, they would rise up, they would revolt or whatever, and try to usher in a new political currency. Now, does that mean that Bitcoin could go to absurdly high fiat valuations in that time? Yeah, absolutely. Bitcoin could easily go to 100,000, a million, 10 million, $100 million at any point, and the US dollar could still be the globally dominant currency. I think it's very interesting to think about, and I think that the ultimate position where you could be right now is here in the 2020s, learning about Bitcoin. It is late enough into Bitcoin's adoption that it's clear that there's no second best immutable proof of work mechanism. So Bitcoin is clearly one with 99.8 or 98% dominance or whatever. It's clearly one, so we're very late enough in the right spot, but we're early enough that most people still haven't realized that. And so over the coming decades, we'll see these other political currencies continue to deteriorate. We'll see hyperinflationary events, and we see all these garbage trucks take away the massive piles of fiat currency. And then eventually down the line, we'll probably see that eventually manifest in the US dollar as well. By that point, probably many years will have passed. But I suppose all I have to say is tempering expectations that it's probably going to take a long time for people to learn. But then also, that doesn't change anything. It really doesn't. Even if it takes 50 years for the US dollar to completely die and vaporize, that doesn't change anything. We're still going to watch many, if not dozens, if not close to 100 other nations and currencies fall first before the dollar. We're going to watch hundreds of millions, if not billions of people adopt Bitcoin well before the dollar hyperinflates and goes to zero. And so in the same way, you should not wait to buy real estate. You should buy real estate and then wait, in the same way that you shouldn't wait to buy stocks. You shouldn't wait to buy Bitcoin. Just because I think the dollar is going to stay around for a long time, because human nature will have it stay around a long time, and human nature will continue to give it energy to stay around for a long time, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in Bitcoin. So I think those are things worthy to consider, that the pain, most people will not adopt Bitcoin until they have faced a tremendous amount of monetary pain. Most of that pain is going to be drug out. It's going to be very slow. It's going to be very long. There'll be rapid periods of debasement, like we saw here in the United States in 2020 and elsewhere around the world. And then that'll permeate throughout the economy. People will get adjusted to their new normal. Things will become relatively stable for a while. And then boom, we'll have it again. We'll probably have at least one more of these cycles here in the 2020s. A rapid period of debasement. Everyone freaks out for a little while. Political turmoil. And then they stabilize a little bit. However, a little bit worse than they were before. And we just see that cycle continue again and again and again until eventually the share of political energy, the share of US dollar dominance compared to the global share of Bitcoin is so small that people just don't care anymore, you know. I don't think we're going to have a major catastrophic blow up where the whole world turns into hyper Bitcoinization within like a 6-month or even a 6-year period. Like, I don't think the transition from fiat to Bitcoin is going to be a single dramatic event. I think it's going to be permeated by many, if not dozens, of smaller dramatic events. It's like a staircase down, not a cliff down. I may be wrong there, but I think fundamentally that's what we see happen. And even if there was a cliff drop where all the fiat currencies in the world hyperinflated today, I think we would simply see a reset of political energy, recoordination for a new currency. Bitcoin still marches on, adoption would increase, but I think my larger point here is that if you're looking forward into the next few decades, I think you have to be really bullish and understand that Bitcoin is going to tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions. There's no fiat price logical for Bitcoin, but at the same time, that doesn't mean necessarily that hyperinflation is going to happen next year or even the next decade. It could take a long time. So with that said, I think you should strongly consider buying Bitcoin, not for fiat price appreciation, but for the freedom and for the ability to preserve a fixed percentage of purchasing power within a given monetary ledger. You're not able to do that with lira. You're not able to do that with pesos. and you're not able to do it with the dollar, even if the dollar is the least bad political currency out there in the world.